Welcome to the Overanalyzers. I'm Dan. I'm a concept artist and illustrator.
And I'm Mike. I'm a software engineer.
We are a weekly podcast, and this week we'll be talking about how do you get good at something. We're going to take a shot real quick, and then we'll get into it.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. So here's what I want you to do. Do you have a browser open?
Yes.
Okay. Go to typeracer.com.
Type. Oh, no.
I know you wouldn't like this, but you must do it for our amusement. Okay, there should be a button that says practice on your own or something like that towards the top of the page.
Practice yourself.
Yeah. So click on that.
I don't know. I'm getting nervous.
Yeah, I know you would.
Okay.
All right, and it'll give you some stuff to type, and you just have to type it.
Okay. So, okay. Hold on.
Are you going?
I can't get past the second
Oh, that's not good.
word. Okay.
Well, if you do too well, it's going to mess up the whole point I'm trying to make, so it's kind of good.
I'm definitely not going to do too well.
Okay.
And
you don't actually have to go for too long. I just want to know what your words per minute is. Okay, you can stop. Just look at the top right and tell me what your words per minute is.
oh, I want to finish it. Okay.
Okay, yeah, finish. Good. This is fun to watch. Especially not being able to see your screen.
I'm almost done.
All right.
Okay, done.
All right. Amazing. What'd you get? What's your words per minute?
34.
Okay, perfect. That's exactly what I wanted you to get. So wonderful. Average typing speed is right around there. It's 30 to 40 words per minute. So
I was actually average.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're dead average. And I sprung that on you out of nowhere. So I imagine if you had tried it a few times, you probably could have done a little bit better. So I bet you would be a little bit above average if you'd had a little more time to prep.
Okay.
Okay. So how long have you been typing for? Or when did you first encounter a computer keyboard and start learning how to do that?
Maybe, I don't know, 10 years old or something.
That's kind of what I figured. And you're 31?
Yep.
Had a birthday this week even, so happy birthday.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so you've been doing this for, let's just say, 2 decades.
Wow. Okay. I should be better than that, but
Well, that's okay. That's where we're headed. The best typists, the people who work very hard and are really pushing the limits here, they're around 200, little bit past 200 words per minute or so. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 times faster than you. Although again, you're average. That's pretty much what most people type at. So that's where you could be, but you're 34 words per minute. And that, again, that's where everybody is. So here's my point with this. Doing something over and over again, every day, year after year, does not make you better at it. You have managed to not get all that good at typing, even though I imagine you do it all the time, right?
yeah.
Okay. So that shows the flaw in the way that most of us think about practicing, about pursuing a skill, or getting good at anything. Is we tend to just think that if we just do it, just practice every day, spend time on it, we think that will make us good at it. And it clearly doesn't. Typing is just one example of many, many things that we do all the time that we are not very good at all. Do you agree?
Yeah. I think I've gotten to a point where it functions for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to slack off of work and talk to my friends through the workday, at a pretty good speed.
Yeah.
It serves my need for it.
Right.
So I don't need to get any better, I guess.
And I think that's exactly what happens for pretty much everybody for pretty much anything we do under normal circumstances. You learn to walk and you get good enough at walking to where it serves your purposes, and that's pretty much it. We can't all just go out and run a marathon, even though we've been walking and using our legs every day for years and years. Getting to that point does not happen from just normal use. And with typing, like I said, among many other skills, it's something that if you put yourself in a new situation, you're now in front of a keyboard and you never have been before. And so you start learning how to do this, and there's a need for it. You have to communicate, so you're forcing yourself to figure this out and causing your brain to have to adapt and learn what keys to press and everything. You adapt to it. You learn up until some point where it becomes comfortable, and then you stay there, potentially forever. And if you want to get past that point, something else has to happen. There has to be something, whatever it is, that pushes you outside of that, and potentially you could be 5 to 6 times better than what you are, but something would have to take you there, and it does not happen naturally.
Right.
Yeah. So why? There's clearly been things that you've gotten good at and things that I've gotten good at. You're an artist, right? You must have used something to make you very good at being an artist, right? It did not work like typing. It was different. What do you think was different about that?
I think my need changed, or my need was bigger than, say, typing.
Right. You weren't really trying to get better at typing, right?
Right. Yeah, so for art, yeah, what's different? I think the need is just bigger. It was much bigger. I needed to improve to a higher level than just average, I think.
Sure.
That was one part of it. The other thing was definitely challenging myself. Whereas, with typing, I'm not trying to achieve something. I don't really have any challenges.
Yeah, well, clearly you're focused on it. You're trying to push yourself, right?
Yeah.
And
yes, it's a very conscious choice.
Right.
To improve.
So
yeah.
Somewhere in there, the gap between the people who are excellent at pushing themselves, let's say you take the best typists in the world, just to stick with typing for a minute. You take the best typists in the world, they're doing something, and then you take an average person who's doing nothing. Somewhere in there is the way you get really good at something. And this seems like a dumb example in some ways because, of course, if you wanted to be good at typing, then you would do something different. You would be trying to get good. But we usually talk about that. If I've gotten advice before on practicing, right? I went to school for music and practiced guitar every day and got told certain things. And most of the advice was pretty stupid. And I would get told sometimes that, oh, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Oh, practice. And then other people would jump in and say, no, it's not practice. It's perfect practice. You have to practice really good to get to Carnegie Hall, and stupid things like that. But that was pretty much the beginning and end of that question, or that line of thinking of how I have a bunch of thoughts on this and I'm trying to get
but I have the same frustration. It's like, but how
right. Like how? That is not an answer, that you're just putting another word in there.
Right.
When I was teaching a lot in person, I had a lot of students, and some did well, some didn't do so well. But there's one thing I learned very early on. You know how you're not really supposed to ask a woman if she's pregnant? No matter how sure you are, that's just kind of a rule. I learned that you should never accuse someone of not practicing when you're a teacher. Because there were several times early on where somebody would come in and we'd have some song or something that we're working on, and they would play it, and I would go, oh, did you just not have much time to practice this week, or what happened? Thinking that they just hadn't worked on it because it sucked. And they go, no, I practiced for hours every single day. I tried so hard. I'm like, oh, Yeah, obviously. Great job. Um, because just just going home and working on something does not guarantee at all that you will ever be any good at it. And we tend to not acknowledge that as teachers, as people who are thinking about this kind of thing. I certainly never was told that. The people who are really good at something, who have put in hours, obviously you have to put in practice time to get good at something. Uh, there is something that they're doing that's very different compared to, let's say, this student that I accused of not working at all. You know, the way that they practiced, the way that they worked on it did not work. And that was actually fairly common. You know, you would get this huge spectrum of, different skill progression from different students and different people based on, it's hard to say what, but some would get really good and some would hardly progress at all, despite having actually worked on it really hard.
So, how do you do it?
So what is it? Yeah. Well, that's what we want to talk about. This has been this is coming from a place of deep frustration. Not from this place of, oh, we've discovered this golden truth that we need to get out to the world. Because I think that it's a huge subject. It's a tremendously complicated thing. There can't be a simple answer. If there was a really simple answer, then we would have all figured it out and everyone would be saying it all over the place that, oh, all you have to do is eat an egg sandwich and then you'll be super focused and you'll get good at something. Like, it's not simple. It has to be complicated or else it'd be thoroughly solved by now. But I want to talk about it. I want to start trying to figure it out because it's so fundamental to almost all of us. I think almost everybody is trying, or at least has tried, to get good at something. And the way you do it is this pretty wide open, unanswered question. As far as we've gotten, at least from my experience, is to say, you should practice it. But clearly, practice is not it, because we practice.
Well, you need perfect practice.
But
yeah.
you need perfect practice, right? So let's figure out what the hell that means.
Right. No, while we were trying to research this or just think about it, I listened to a lot of podcasts on, how to learn, and I watched a lot of YouTube videos on, how to learn anything or how to become good at something in 20 days or whatever.
I think I watched that one too.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with any of the things I found, and some of them were more insightful than others.
Yeah.
But a lot of them, they just kind of list all of these facts, Oh, if you want to get good at something, you need to do it every day. You need to wake up early. Try maybe 20 minutes every day. Try an hour a day. Try this, try that. And it's just, these little tidbits of,
it
little
feels
tricks.
like it feels like as far as we've gotten is time. That,
right.
Oh, do you want to get good at something? Well, you should do it. And that's
right.
That's the end of the whole plan.
Some of the videos, it would be, one person who learns all of these different things. So, they learned how to play guitar. They learned how to, I don't know, skydive. They learned how to speed read. They learned how to type, all these different things. And really all they're doing is they learned some of the basics, enough to call themselves, a guitarist or something. But then they go to the next thing and they learn that. Right. So they've mastered the art of getting well acquainted with a new skill, but they have not mastered that skill. They have not taken it to the extreme level. They're not brilliant, amazing guitarists. They're just basic. Pretty much anyone can handle the beginning stages of these things, but taking it further, it gets a little bit more complicated. So that was one frustration I had. I don't know. There were definitely some good videos, but overall, I was getting really frustrated with what I was finding because it's just not enough.
Yeah, my experience was the same. I mean, it has been forever, right? I went to school for something very tangible in the sense that, if you're a classical guitar performer, how you practice is very directly reflected in how good you get at the instrument. And like, it's vitally important for somebody on that track to be very good at using their time and know how to get really good at it. And there was nothing given to me that had any real insight into that. I mean, the best I found was just recommendations on what to do, not how to do it. Practice scales for 20 minutes a day at the start of
Right.
every practice session, and then work on your repertoire pieces, and then do this and that, and play with a metronome. But none of it had any real insight into that question. And same as you, I went on a spree of podcasts and videos. I read The Art of Learning in the past couple of weeks, which actually was at least somewhat rewarding. There were some insights there, even though I think the book could have been called The Art of Mastery more than The Art of Learning. It kind of skips over the first 2/3 of how you get good at something and talks about the mindset of a competitor. It's a good book though, and we can talk about that too. But yeah, there's just not much to help with this unbelievably important question on how you develop a skill, how you get good at something.
All right. So should we talk about your mouse accuracy
Mm,
trainer thing?
yeah, so I started thinking about this mostly in the context of StarCraft, which we talked about. It's this game, it's a competitive game where you play against somebody else, and it's extremely complicated. The game is extremely fast, lots of things happen, and you're trying to outplay, outsmart, outmaneuver your opponent and beat them. And I got frustrated with that too, because I was trying to use that as a vehicle for thinking about, okay, how do I get good? What makes me better at this game? What makes me worse? But it was completely overwhelming, and I didn't really get anywhere. It's not the first time I've thought about this, but I was really thinking hard about it and didn't get too far. So I wanted to isolate something a bit more simple that we can pay more attention to. So I started playing around with this. It's called, what was it? Mouseaccuracy.com, which is a mouse accuracy trainer, which I had started thinking of StarCraft, and so this is a relevant skill. How quickly and accurately can you move your mouse around the screen and click on things and not miss, or
Right.
so this site, it shows a screen with different targets that kind of pop up around the screen, and you have to move your mouse over and click on one, and then move to the next one and click on that one. It's really simple. It's target practice with a mouse pointer. But it starts out, there's an easy difficulty where I think the number was like about 1 target per second. And so you have to click on 1 per second. I found that very easy. You go up to medium, which is I think 1.5 targets per second, and that was a little bit more difficult. And so I'm moving around, and all I really had to do to beat that one was to just focus a bit and kind of start, I guess, just focusing on it, like practicing a little bit. I can feel myself start to get a little more in tune with my movements and what works and what doesn't. But then I got to the hard one, and that one was very difficult. It was outside of my skills, right? I just could not move quickly enough to click the targets in time. But I was relatively close. I could get most of them. I would miss a few. And so I felt like I was almost there, like I could almost do it, but not quite. And that was a very, I won't say frustrating, but I just kept doing it and thinking, if I could just push a little bit harder. So I kept trying and like almost getting there. And I eventually finally did. Like I got there once. I was able to do a perfect run where I got everything on hard mode, which I think was 2 targets per second or something like that. And so it felt great, but then I couldn't do it again. And so I came back the next day, tried it again, and then got it. And eventually I started to be able to do it more and more consistently. But they also have an insane mode, which is I think 3.1 targets per second. So it's actually a huge jump from 2 up to 3. And when you figure that it gets exponentially more difficult as you get faster, it's actually a massive gap. So I would try it on insane mode, thinking, okay, I can do hard, but I can't do insane. And I just couldn't get anywhere. It's just way too fast, completely overwhelming. And I would try it and think, okay, well, I got to try again. And I couldn't get anywhere. And I just never really made any progress with that. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but it got me thinking about, okay, I have this very simple skill, how accurately can you move a mouse? and what causes me to get better at this skill versus not. And there's a few things that I think are there. One, it took a little while to get ramped up on that skill. I wasn't very good at it right at the start. I had to start to get focused. I move a mouse on a screen all day, every day, and I have for at least 2 decades, probably more. Right? Like that is a thing that I do all the time. And same as the typing thing, I have not gotten any better at it, or hardly at all, in decades. So just doing it is not enough. Having to start pushing against it, like finding the boundary of what I'm able to do, and force myself into an uncomfortable position of having to change the way I move and move faster and more controlled, is what allows me to progress along that skill. And actually, when I started doing this, I could feel muscles in my arm start to hurt and get uncomfortable. And there was a lot of things to figure out too. It's funny, but something as simple as moving your mouse turns out to be complicated, and there's a lot of subtle things that happen. If you're lazy and you like rest your wrist on the desk, and you can move your mouse with your hand, but if you're having to move to different corners of the screen, it's not enough motion. So you have to actually lift your wrist up and suspend it, and then like slide your entire arm around to make those kinds of movements. So there's this awkward period of certain targets I can hit by leaving my wrist down, but others I have to suspend my arm, and suspending my arm is kind of uncomfortable. Basically, in doing this, I had to force my body to do things that it's not used to doing, and actually change my way of moving the mouse around. So that was part of what let me start progressing with that. And I with typing, right? Like me and everyone else got to watch you from this perspective type. You said that you type with 3 fingers, right?
Well, no, I type with all fingers, I think.
Okay.
It's mostly, I mean, it is not the correct way to type. No.
Well, whatever. One thing I noticed is that your eyes kept moving from the screen to your keyboard.
Yeah.
Right?
I've never been able to grow out of that. No.
You know how I grew out of it? I
By
bought
working
a
on it?
keyboard. Well, no, actually, well, kind of. I bought a keyboard that had blank keys.
Yeah.
So if you looked at the keyboard, it didn't do anything for you. So you just kind of get used to looking at the
Right.
screen. Anyway, there's a bunch of issues that are there. Boundaries, I guess. And some are obvious and some are not obvious at all. Some are really subtle. But the obvious ones, like with you, could be the way you move your eyes from the screen to the keyboard. And if you forced yourself to try and improve your typing speed, you would probably discover pretty quickly that that was a barrier that you had to break. And with my mouse movement, I start discovering these things that are keeping me at this lower level of speed that I have to get through. The way I, hold my hand versus, or, lay my rest on the desk versus suspending my arm. That just had to change if I was going to get any faster. And there's other really subtle things like the way my muscles work. I actually got really sore. I was starting to worry that I might injure myself by doing this. So I had to stop and then come back the next day. And eventually I adapted to it and was able to do it more comfortably. But little stuff like that. The way you move your mouse to a target, what I would do, again, with this kind of lazy, very average motion, was to just kind of fling the mouse across the screen, and then once it gets into the area of the target, eventually bring it down and then click on it. And I actually recorded myself using OBS to watch my own mouse movement after the fact. And I would frequently overshoot the target, bring it back, and kind of like hone in on the target and click. And clearly that's not a good motion. So I had to force myself to, at very slow speeds, practice moving to a target without overshooting and decelerating at the perfect time to land right on the target and click it, and then immediately move in a very straight line to the next one. And other very tiny things, like just how quickly I can move after I've clicked, is I can move very quickly because I'm making a large movement towards a target. So as soon as the click happens and I know that it's registered, I can kind of fling my arm. But as I get closer to a target, I need to be very precise. So I actually slow down. So the curve of mouse movement changes, where I'm moving very quickly at first and then slowly towards the end and then immediately accelerating towards the next one.
All right. This is a very elegant skill, or you've explained it very elegantly. I, when we were talking about this a little bit before, I was trying to think of a simple skill that I've worked on, and the only good example that came to mind for me was not quite as elegant, but 4 years ago, I used to live in Cocoa, and then I got the job in Orlando. So I had to spend 4 hours in the car,
Right.
Monday through Friday.
Which is brutal.
So I was in the car a lot, and I got really tired of podcasts and music, and really just
What?
tired of
No,
everything.
podcasts are great. Everyone should listen to them all the time.
Well, 4 hours a day for 5 days in a row every week was
Right.
you get tired of anything. Anyway, so what I started doing was something that I used to do with my friends, just goofing around, and that is learning rap songs and trying to sing along with them.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it was, always kind of fun with friends to try to one up the other and, see who can memorize the song first and get through the whole thing without messing up, whatever. So it just randomly occurred to me on one of these long drives, I'm going to do that again and see if I can get really good. And I'm never going to show anyone, never going to perform this.
Yeah.
I just want to see how good I can get. And so I would, I started with a lot of the same songs that I, used to know with my friends and stuff. And then I would get to faster and faster songs. And then eventually I was doing like Busta Rhymes. I'm sure you know who that is.
I do.
Do you really?
I
Okay,
I
anyway.
guess. I mean, I
Anyway,
can't name a song, but
right. I'm not going to name any, but
okay.
so I slowly increased the speed in the songs, and I didn't ever become incredible, but I found that I would search through my Spotify and find a song that seemed absolutely impossible to do, and then that's the one I would choose, and then I was actually really successful at learning it. And thinking back on it now, I've come up with a uh, couple different stages that I would go through in order to ensure my success on learning these songs.
Okay.
And what I found was, well, first it filled a need. It fulfilled my boredom or my need for something entertaining because I was so bored in the car. So it was just entertaining. It was really simple. Uh, so the first stage of learning one of these songs is sort of the adventure discovery stage, where I'm looking for a song that fits the entertaining need.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking for a song, imagining myself doing it, just finding something fun to do, and then I would choose it, and then I would go into the stumble phase, where I would put it on in the car, and I would, get a little acquainted with it, hear it 2 or 3 times, and then I would just try to fake my way through it. I mean, I would be making noises from the second it started till it ended. I mean, no one could hear me or see me,
Yeah.
so it didn't really matter. But I would just fake my way through the whole thing. So that was like my stumble play around mode, and that would show me exactly what I needed to work on, what I didn't need to work on. Say, even if I only got two words out of that whole song, I didn't have to work on those words. I just had to work on everything else. So that was the stumble phase, and then the next phase would be the most complicated one, which was the breakdown. What did I call it? Oh, I guess magnifying glass stage, where you're
Okay.
you're observing everything really closely and trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And you have to memorize the song itself. You have to memorize the lyrics. So you got to read through the lyrics, figure out what he's actually saying, and then memorize, how he's saying it and the
Mm-hmm.
order of things. I mean, you really have to do some reading on the lyrics, and then you got to listen to the song a lot. And it was just fun for me. But so there was a whole bunch of different ways that I would go about learning these things. I don't know if we want to get into all of them, but the different stages that I
Yeah.
found in this I think are really interesting and actually apply to how you learn anything. And the way I was thinking about it is because this was a skill that did not matter to me at all, other than it was just for fun. I had no, like, I could care less if I was bad at this, you know? I mean, I was trying to
Right.
get good, but I don't feel like a failure as a person if I can't get through this rap song. Like, I don't care. And it wasn't for anyone else but me. And so what I found was in the, uh, in the discovery phase, stop me if any of this stops
No, no,
making sense, but
this is perfect. I'm actually really excited that this is your example. Go
okay.
ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. In the discovery phase, in comparing the discovery phase with the rap songs versus say my whole art pursuit, during that phase where you're just kind of looking around looking for different artists or rappers or whatever, what song you want to learn, you you begin to develop this identity of who you are, or really just, you know, what you want to do. And for the stuff in the car, it was real simple and real quick and just fun and short, and it probably lasted 10 minutes of choosing a song,
Yeah.
or, you know, choosing what I wanted to do. In the art world, I developed this big identity of who I wanted to be, and it's really stuck with me since the beginning. And learning the rap songs is a very simple skill, but art is a very,
Right.
at least, you know, I wasn't creating raps, I was just memorizing things. So it was a little bit simpler. But what I realized is that during that discovery phase, there are certainly positives to it where you pick something and go forward with it, but there are this idea of your future self, which we've talked about before,
Hmm.
the perfectionist attitude where you imagine yourself in the future being really good at something. That's where it forms, is in this discovery stage. And then, but you don't realize it then, or at least this is my theory, is it forms in that stage, but you don't realize it then. It's not until you get to the stumbling phase where you're trying it yourself and really placing yourself in the world of this skill. That's when the pain shows up. And if you care, if you see this skill as being a big part of you, say with me in art, but not with me in say rap songs, um, I didn't care about it, so it never hurt me to get it wrong or something. But say with
Hmm.
art, when I would start doing projects or doing paintings and it didn't line up with what I wanted to do, it was very hurtful and very painful because I wasn't adding up to this perfectionist thing. And so I was looking at these different phases and seeing like the positive of them, and then this flip side where all of these symptoms of these bad things start showing up. So I don't know. That was just one or a
Yeah.
couple observations I was making on these things.
Well, so it's interesting. I talked for a while about this mouse thingy that I got super obsessed with, and I don't know if I said this, but I was using mouseaccuracy.com and found it frustrating because some of the things that I discovered about the way this works were okay with what you're saying about, sorry, again, there's a lot in my head
Well,
about
no,
on
I
this
have tons
subject.
more to say too. We
Yeah,
can't cover it all right now. Yeah.
I think that you need to be in a very particular place to develop that kind of skill. And there are different kinds of skills. And when we're talking about something very complicated, like playing a competitive sport or a competitive video game like StarCraft, or being a pianist or being an artist, there's a lot that goes into that. But in this case, with the mouse movement thing, it's a pretty isolated skill, and it's a physical skill. I mean, there obviously there's mental aspects to it, but you know, it's this thing that you can't just, it's not memory, right? Or at least not in the sense that you're going to memorize
Well,
a
I
list of
mean, there's
100
certainly
things.
memory involved. You have to remember how to move things. I would relate it to, say, practicing scales or something. You know,
Okay,
it's kind of like that.
I guess here's what I'm thinking. If you if you're a guitarist, like I was a classical guitarist, so you would spend a lot of time learning how to play a song. You have some classical piece that you're trying to learn. So a good chunk of your time would be spent just internalizing the notes. And there's all different ways of memorizing or having a memory. That some of it is visual, some of it is tactile, like you remember how your body moves, things like that. But you spend a huge amount of your time while you're first learning that piece just getting it into your head. You're looking at the notes on a page, translating them into where your fingers go, and then just becoming familiar with that and memorizing it. And that's the kind of thing that you can, I don't want to say cram for, but you have an ability to absorb a lot of stuff on a long stretch. You know, if you're studying for a history exam, I mean, you shouldn't, but you can cram a bunch of memory information into your head within a reasonably small window. You know, if I haven't studied for a test and I go, oh my God, it's tomorrow, I can study for 12 hours and yeah, I'm going to be burnt out and exhausted, but I can get a lot of information into my head in 12 hours and then regurgitate it next day for the history exam. I probably won't
Right.
retain that for very long, but that's a different problem. But for something like moving your mouse accurately or rapping to a song, no, I mean it's actually a very
Yeah.
similar thing. It's a physical skill. You know, there's something going on there. It's, yes, there's memory involved, but you're developing this very primitive type of skill, and that's not something you can just do on a Saturday in 12 hours. Does that part of it make sense? Like there's a distinction between this very fundamental skill that has to be developed over a long period of time and then something that's more just memory oriented where
Oh,
you're
yeah.
just getting facts into your brain.
Yeah, it's not it really involves a lot of different, even though it's an isolated skill and it's pretty simple if you compare it to, say, you know, I don't know, playing competitive games or
Yeah.
being a
Anything
musician
complicated, yeah.
right, whatever. It's pretty isolated, but there is a large series of abilities that you have to use in order to accomplish this thing.
Yeah.
Say for the mouse stuff and problem solving abilities that you have to
Yeah.
utilize. Say when I was learning these rap songs, I would well, there were certain phrases that I could not say no matter how hard I tried. And what I found was that I had been looking at them the wrong way. And it was all it took for me to be able to say them was to stop thinking of the words and just think of them as sounds or something. You
Yeah.
know, instead of seeing it as 4 words, I'd see it as 5 words and they were just nonsense words. And then all of a sudden I could say it. So it was really weird, but you just look at it differently. So it was this problem solving
Right.
ability that I had to utilize.
No, I'm very excited about what you're saying there. So here's some of what I discovered with this mouse thing. You have to be in a very particular place to improve that type of skill. Something very primitive and fundamental. You know, how quickly you can move your hand around and click on things. And that's it's not the type of skill that you can just cram for. It's difficult to improve. It's not something you can do consciously. You can't read a book on how to move your mouse better and then expect to be really good at it. Even if there were some kind of
Right.
insights there, you would have to spend a lot of time physically doing it. And I practice on this site, this mouseaccuracy.com, and for certain parts of it, I was getting better and I could feel it. When I was right on the edge of, I can almost do this, but not quite, and I'm really pushing and I can start to recognize what needs to be better and what doesn't. And sometimes I would find something like the way I would overshoot a target and go, oh, this isn't right. This is not the optimal way to do that. And I know that. Then I would go to a very slow speed, practice it at a slow speed, try to get that feeling ingrained, and then switch to the faster speed and try doing it really fast, but keeping that same motion. And what I'm saying is that you have to be in the perfect place to actually get better, to make this step of growing this skill. And there's all kinds of little roadblocks that pop up, like what you're saying about thinking of the words as literal words, but then having to change the way you think about it a little bit to where they're just sounds. That type of thing, and there are always these weird, subtle little things that are hard to explain, but that type of thing reveals itself. Like with typing, I'm actually a reasonably good typist for a few reasons. I can hit around 100 to
Yeah,
maybe
yeah, yeah.
110 words a minute if
I
I'm
knew you
like,
wouldn't use that example
right,
unless
unless
you
I
were
could
good
brag
at
about
it.
it.
Right, yes.
Okay, fair
Go
and
ahead.
sorry. Sorry that I did that. But here's a couple reasons why. One, I have played typeracer.com before a bunch and got kind of obsessed with it for the same reasons as this mouse thing is kind of obsessing me. I'm wondering why I'm not good at it and wanting to get better. And there's a few things I discovered. Um, First off, you obviously can't look at your hands while you type. That will slow you down. So I had to get rid of that. I fairly recently changed my key repeat delay to be 100 milliseconds. So typically, when you press a key, you have, I'm not sure how long it is, close to probably a second or so before you can let it up. And if you hold it down for longer than that, it'll start to repeat that same letter. So if you press the letter J and you keep it held down, it'll start saying J, 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 J. So my key repeat delay is set to 100 milliseconds, which is a tenth of a second. And this is just all day, every day, under normal circumstances. If I hold down any key for longer than 1/10 of a second, it starts repeating. And at first, this was obnoxious and it was almost impossible to type on. Where as soon as you hit a key, it just starts repeating itself, and I gotta hit delete, but then delete deletes too much because that's repeating too, and it was just a mess. But I adapted to that. And the logic is the same as the reason why somebody would learn to type in the first place. Is that if you give somebody a keyboard and you say, okay, you got to figure out how to type, here's the words, you need to make them happen, your mind adapts to that new environment where, okay, my fingers got to move, here's where they go, and you start learning how to do it. But you get comfortable after a while. And so I decided to make myself uncomfortable typing by putting this ridiculously fast key repeat delay to where I have to learn how to very, very quickly hit a key. And so that was an adaptation that I learned to make by kind of forcing myself to. I got a keyboard with no no letters printed on it, so I had to adapt to never looking at my hands because it didn't help at all. I did typing tests where I forced myself to push the boundaries of how fast I could type, and I did a bunch of things to try and get myself to that point of feeling uncomfortable. But there's certain things you discover there too, like what you said with the rapping thing. When you're typing, you visualize yourself pressing a key and then letting up, and then pressing another key and letting up, and you're kind of like articulating each finger, pressing a bunch of keys. But that isn't what happens. And you discover this if you try to type really fast. You're actually making motions with both of your hands, where when you type a word, or not even a word, like a fragment of a word, you're making these like almost wave-like rolling motions with your fingers, or you aren't pressing one finger at a time. You're doing these much more complicated motions where you're grouping letters together and just rolling your fingers off of them, and it's more like these little wave patterns that happen in your hand. And you start to learn that, and you start to develop, your ability to type faster. And those same kinds of things were happening with the mouse movement thing, where I start to discover subtle little motions, ways of seeing multiple targets and kind of grouping that into, it's not really a single motion, but my mind almost processes it that way. um I forget where I'm going with this.
Well, your whole approach to learning this thing is so analytical and productive. I mean, it's bringing you results. But that way of thinking is what I I
Yeah.
want to explore.
Yes, I guess. Yeah, what the point with that is that in order to improve at a skill like that, you have to kind of equip yourself in the right ways, where you've made observations, you've adjusted certain things. With the mouse movement, I had to sit there and practice even at a slow speed, not overshooting a target. I have to, you know, analytically figure out, okay, this is the right motion that I want to make. I want to stop exactly on the target and then move in a straight line towards the next one. And I want to suspend my arm this way and all that kind of stuff. I kind of set myself up in a certain way. And then, and this is very important, you have to take that setup and push it to the limit of what you can currently do, or push it slightly beyond the limit of what you can currently do, and try to get to where you're forcing yourself to move faster than you have before and adapt to this uncomfortable new environment of something you haven't you aren't comfortable with, something that's a little bit beyond your ability. Anyway, with this mouse trainer site, I made my own. That's what I was trying to get to. I built my own version of this in the Godot game engine and started experimenting with different ways of trying to pursue what do I say this? Trying to set myself up to get to that very particular point where I've set everything up correctly, I'm using the right motions, I have everything in place, and then it pushes me to that limit. So I tried some different game modes, or different modes that I set up, where it starts out really slow and then logarithmically approaches your speed limit, where it just edges you just past, you know, your previous limit of how fast you can go. So you're moving slowly, trying to get the right motions down, but it progressively pushes you there. Also experimented with a mode where it starts clusters of targets, to where you have a really small amount of time to make these really fast movements, but it's in these really short bursts. So you don't get to that point where you just can't do it anymore. You can do it, only barely, but
So
for
you're
really small
trying to
moments of
attack
time.
it from all these different angles.
Yes. Yeah. And the way it's done, or what I have found by experimenting with myself, is that there are very particular tiny little things that lead to actual improvement, and it's very, very easy to miss them. You know, you can go practice something and it's extremely easy to just do the same comfortable thing over and over and not progress. It's also easy to do something that causes you to not use the right movements, or, you know, whatever the skill is that we're talking about. It's very easy to mess that up, to where you aren't pushing the very limits of what you can do in exactly the right way.
This, I don't know if it's totally related, but one of the other things I was thinking about is I think there are certain phases that you go through when developing skills. And if you expect yourself to perform at a level in a different say it was a lot clearer in my head.
It's a hard subject. There's a reason why nobody talks about it, because it's a bunch of weird, hard to articulate things that go into it.
Well, I guess what I was trying to say is, say in the, like, if you're discovering who you want to be, or what song you want to learn, or something like that, this is a time of exploration. And if you just immediately jump into trying to play something and then you're not super good at it right away, if you have pictured yourself as being really good and all of a sudden you're not really good, and you're not seeing that next level of, like, that's what's supposed to happen, you're supposed to be bad at it. If you don't know that, then you're going to judge yourself so harshly on it that you're just going to hit a roadblock. You won't be able to learn, because you're judging yourself on the wrong level, on the wrong, I don't know, the wrong.
Here's what that sounds like to me. Have you? Oh, I wrote this down because I knew I was going to forget.
I should have written more down, because I just keep blanking on all of this.
Oh, okay. Have you heard of the entity versus incremental theory?
No.
Okay. So there appears to be two pretty fundamental ways to think in regards to this kind of thing. Some people have the entity theory, and it's not a theory, it's just the way you tend to think of yourself, or the way you tend to think of other people, in that you tend to think that your intelligence is fixed. You are who you are, and if you do something and you happen to be good at it, then you were good at this thing. And if you do something and you aren't very good at it, then, well, you were just bad at that thing. Or you're a fast learner, you're a slow learner, you're good with music, you're bad with music, whatever. It's kind of this fatalistic, things are the way they are type of mindset. And then there's the incremental theory, which is the opposite of that, where if you do something and you do well, it's because you had the right approach, and if you didn't do well, then you should have done better, you could have done better, and you're going to adjust your approach and try to do better that way. This idea that you can learn, you can adapt, you know, it's up to you, you're in control more or less, versus the entity theory, which is you're somewhat out of control, it is what it is. Anyway, with these two types of people, the entity theorists, people who tend to think that way, they tend to favor opportunities for being tested, or competition. Let's say you're playing StarCraft, which is something I do. These entity theorists would be the type where you match up with an opponent and you're trying to win, doing everything you can, and if you win, you beat them and you're better, and if you lose, you're worse and that sucks. Or maybe the game isn't balanced, or your opponent used a stupid strategy, whatever. The incremental theorists play a game, they lose, and then immediately almost blame themselves or think, I should have done this better. Next time I'm going to do this. And they're immediately focusing on what they can do to change to try to overcome that thing. And the incremental theorists are universally better at stuff because they tend to always take responsibility for a failure and try and change it and adapt to overcome something. It's a very fundamental way of thinking. And it sounds similar to what you're saying, in that if you're visualizing some future state where you're good at something, but you currently aren't, and you're doing things in order to get there, or analyzing the world that way, in the sense of, I messed this up, but I should have done this instead, or I need to change my approach, or I need to adjust this or that. Like, is that kind of what you're saying? Like, that's the way you get to that future state?
Well, yes, but it's also, I mean, if I expect to do really good on something, but I do really bad at something, that can ruin me for a week or two, where I am a failure. I'll never
Yeah.
be good enough. And
Yeah.
I can't learn anymore. Whereas really I should have known that, that's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
You screw up after trying your best, and then you figure out why that is, and
Well,
then
I think
you
in
work on it.
that scenario, you're being the entity theorist, not the incremental theorist, in the sense
Uh,
that if you are overcome with those feelings of inadequacy and failure, then you're taking that experience as a reflection on you as a person, not as, I messed up, I
right.
did the wrong thing, I got to do something better. You know what I
Right.
mean?
I for sure relate more to the first group.
Yeah.
The
I,
end. Yes.
I we talked about the first one in the game theory a week or two ago, and that is, I think, one of the very fundamental. Well, there's many fundamental aspects of your mentality and the way you approach something. That's a small piece of what can affect the way you learn something. The entity theorist type of thinking, the way you always look for a way to improve, or blame what you did rather than yourself and your own self-worth. That's a really fundamental piece of how you get good at something. There's who knows how many. There's so many different components of what goes on in your head when you're trying to get good at something. And I want to explore a lot of them, or as many as we can, in future episodes, because there's just so many pieces to that puzzle. And I think ultimately all of them affect your ability to get yourself into that state. Kind of what I was saying with that silly example of the mouse stuff, or you with rapping a song. There is a certain place that you have to be to where you improve at those kinds of skills. And it's delicate. It's easy to overshoot, where you're doing something too difficult to where you aren't able to adapt. It's overwhelming and you're just kind of flailing around. It's very easy to be on the other end, where you're too comfortable and you aren't forcing your mind and your body to adapt to something new. And there's, even if you're trying to push yourself to that edge, there's all kinds of things that can interfere with that. If you have the wrong technique or the wrong approach, or you can very easily be stuck on a local minimum where you're pushing something that isn't actually the best way to do it, and you don't exceed your boundaries.
It's really weird, but I was probably more efficient at learning rap songs than I was at learning art, because I wasn't so emotionally involved with it. It was just fun and silly and whatever.
but
But I had streamlined this process of
yeah,
learning, and it wasn't too personal for me. And I want to be able to do that with art stuff, or other things.
yeah.
You know?
It, Yeah, it is interesting. But you were clearly trying to get better at it, right? You
Oh,
weren't,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, you had a goal, you were pushing yourself in whatever sense.
But I'm
And
trying to get better at art,
no,
than
I
I
know,
was then at the same time. Yeah.
but something about your approach, which, like you said, it didn't really matter in a sense, that allowed you. This is my framing of the problem, right? I'm trying to
Yeah,
get
yeah, yeah.
something concrete, or a concrete way of thinking about it. To me, your mental approach to it allowed you to push against your current skill boundary much more effectively, or maybe more effectively than you were able to in other areas of your life. And that led to you getting good at this skill that, yeah, maybe
Doesn't
doesn't
matter.
matter,
Yeah.
but whatever. What, I mean, at the end of the day,
Right.
what actually
Nothing
matters? I
matters.
mean, we're all just doing our thing. But anyway, that's very, very interesting to me. And that's something that I want to continue to explore and try to unravel. What are the things that go into that, and how do you make sure, for a skill that you do care about and you do identify with and value a lot, how do you make sure that when you go to spend time on it and work on it, how do you get to that very tricky place to be where you
Right.
are developing that skill and actually pushing boundaries and becoming better at it?
Right. And also, I mean, with say you playing StarCraft where there is a lot going on, or me being an artist, learning rap songs is memory, it's more isolated. But being an artist, I'm creating things, I'm
Right.
learning skills, I'm memorizing things. It's a whole lot of stuff going on. So how do you take something that complex? I mean, it is infinitely complex. How do you break that down, isolate the exact
Yes.
skills you need, work on those, and how do you do that?
Yeah, we're kind of talking about some pretty isolated physical skills. And I mean, I wanted to, we were trying to make observations about this very simple thing, but
Right.
most of the
Yeah.
skills that people care about are much bigger and more complicated and involve lots and lots of different things. So trying to pick apart what's involved in something like being a great artist and being creative or being a great pianist or something, there's infinitely more to it. But if the goal of today is to get started, then that's
Yeah,
my
we're starting small. I'm
right.
saying that's the type of stuff I want to talk about.
Yes.
I want to get into and figure out.
Yeah.
And if I am an what is it? Entity or
I think it's called an
entities.
entity theorist. I
All right,
should.
if I'm an entity theorist, what if I want to change? What if I don't want to be
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Well, I think you
You know?
you shouldn't want to be that. I mean,
Right. Is it possible to change?
right.
Or wait, am I thinking as an entity theorist and that I cannot change?
If you think that you
Because
can
that's what they
change,
would.
yes, then that's the incremental theorist way of thinking.
But just because you think you can change, does that mean you can change? Whatever. What if I don't want to be the way that I am?
Let's
Can I
assume that
change
you
it?
can,
Okay.
just for our own purposes. Let's assume you can, and we can explore
But
that.
I think that means that you're an incrementalist, right?
Yeah, I
And
think
I
so.
must be.
I mean, it's not like there's people come out in these two categories. We're all some spectrum, and there's certain areas of my life where I'm definitely an incremental theorist, and other areas where I'm an entity theorist. And I don't want to be. I recognize that's not a good thing, but at least I don't think it's a good thing.
Right.
Like you said, you had a different mentality with rapping in the car on the way to work, and you actually got good at it because that turned out to be the right mentality. And I think you absolutely could apply that to other things in your life. And that's the kind of thing that I want to talk about.
Right. Right. Yeah. Oh, and when we were talking about, say, the first one of the game, I mean, that is, it's the beginning. That is your approach to whatever
Mm-hmm.
thing that you do. And what if you're 10 years down the road, having not been the first one in the game, but you want to be? What if
Right.
you want to
Right.
approach something differently? How do you change that fundamental relationship with something?
Yeah.
It's just a question. I don't have an answer.
Yeah, I
And I
don't
don't,
either,
yeah.
but again, it's a huge topic. It's very complicated. It's unbelievably important, and to me at least, it feels extremely underexplored. It I had a very hard time finding anything concrete or helpful on this question. How do I get good at X skill that I want to pursue. But
Right.
yeah, I would like to focus on that for a while, which I think we will.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up.
Okay. Thanks everybody for hanging out. If you want to leave us a comment, send us an email. You can email us at theoveranalyzerspodcast@gmail.com. We've gotten some great, amazing feedback from you guys. Really appreciate it. See you next week.